They always say you feel it before you see it, like some primal warning bell deep in your gut. Something ancient inside you starts screaming even before the sky changes color. I was flying a short-haul cargo run when it began. Standard route from Kyoto south to the Pacific archipelago. 22 minutes of boredom between ocean and sky. Nothing but clouds, rusted metal crates, and the dull hum of engines. I remember tapping the console, checking the news feed, sipping lukewarm coffee. Just another Tuesday pretending to matter. Then the static hit, not on the comms, not in the engines. In the air, the clouds stopped moving. Wind vanished. My hair stood up like lightning was waiting for a reason. Then the sky cracked open. Not lightning, not thunder, something else. Wrong in every sense. A silence that didn't belong. And from it came this shadow. No, not a shadow, a shape. So big it blotted out the sun like someone had taken a hot iron brand and pressed it against the heavens. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a mountain fell sideways from space and kept falling until it stopped just above the city. My altimeter shorted out. Navigation froze. Comms went dead. But all I could do was stare through the cockpit glass at the impossible. A carrier. Alien. Vast. No lights. No markings. No sound. Just that impossible silhouette looming over New Kyoto. It moved with terrifying patience, like it didn't need to rush, like it knew we couldn't stop it. And then came the fire. It didn't fire a beam. It didn't launch a missile. It opened, like a wound, like a mouth, and the fire just poured out. Not red, not orange, white, blue, pure and surgical, like the kind of flame that doesn't just burn, it erases. One moment, the Kyoto skyline. The next, a smear of ash. My ship lurched sideways as the shockwave hit. Pressure, bending metal, glass spiderwebbing. I fought the stick, engines groaning, trying not to black out as the wind howled like Earth herself was screaming. I didn't crash, not immediately. I managed to guide the bird toward an open valley east of the city, one of those untouched patches of nature that somehow survived urban sprawl and human greed. I clipped a treetop, lost a wing, spiraled through smoke and embers, and came down hard. Everything went black. For how long, I don't know. When I came to, it was quiet. That unnatural kind of quiet you only hear after everything worth hearing has already died. I unstrapped, half-limped, half-crawled out of the wreckage. My ribs were cracked. My leg was ruined. But I was breathing, and somehow, that felt wrong. Around me, the forest burned in patches. Red mist hung in the air. Above, that damn thing still hovered, motionless, watching. I wasn't a soldier anymore. Hadn't been for 5 years. Used to wear the patch, sure. Special Ops Recon, Ghost Company. But I'd left that world behind. Or at least, I thought I had. Retired into transport gigs. Dead cargo for dying colonies. Just enough money to drink away the parts of me that still dreamed in blood. But war has a way of calling you home, even when you're not sure it's your home anymore. I limped toward the nearest road, hoping, praying, for signs of life. Found a flipped civilian transport a few clicks down, smoke curling from the engine. Inside, a father, already gone, and a girl, 10, maybe 11, pinned under debris, her arm broken, face streaked with ash and tears. She looked at me like I was the last person left in the world. Maybe I was. I carried her. Didn't matter that my leg was screaming or that every step felt like gravel grinding in my bones. I carried her because it was something human, something defiant. We reached a ranger station by dusk, half-burned, abandoned, but it had a med kit and a solar receiver. I patched her up, got the radio working. No response, just static. And in that static, whispers, broken military codes, emergency tones, and one phrase that kept repeating like a bad dream. This is not a drill. That night, she asked me what was happening. I didn't lie. I told her the truth. Aliens, I said. The kind that don't want to talk. She asked if they were going to kill everyone. I told her I didn't know, but I'd do everything I could to make sure they didn't. She nodded once, didn't cry, just fell asleep against my shoulder while the fire outside kept licking the trees. By morning, I found a downed recon drone tangled in the river reeds. Military, human. Its black box was intact. I cracked it open and played back the footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just Kyoto, London, Nairobi, Detroit, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, all gone, simultaneously, like someone flipped a switch and turned the lights out across the planet. Orbital strikes, precise, indifferent. Cities were data points to be deleted. They weren't here for resources, or territory, or peace. They were here for us. And they were erasing us with the same detachment you'd delete a corrupted file. Later that day, I found survivors. A few, dirty, ragged, terrified. One of them recognized me from a vid years ago, back when I still wore the black armor and stripes. "Are you Elias Ward?" he asked. Like the name meant anything now. I told him it didn't matter who I was, but they followed me anyway. We found an abandoned armory 2 days later, hidden in a mountain tunnel. Old Cold War stockpile, repurposed during the Mars crisis, then forgotten like so many of our sins. Inside were rifles, ammo, rations, a rusted exo-frame that still hummed when you punched in the override code. I took it, not because I wanted to fight, because I had to. That night, I looked at the sky. The carrier was still there, unmoving, a god staring down at an ant farm. I remembered something my old CO once told me during the dark years on Titan Station. The universe doesn't owe us survival. It only respects resistance. Well, I figured it was time we earned a little respect. This wasn't about winning. Not yet. This was about surviving long enough to remind them what kind of creature crawled out of Earth's mud and dared to defy the stars. We weren't ready. We weren't equipped. We were scattered, broken, bleeding, but we were still here. And that meant the war had just begun. They thought I was dead. Hell, I thought I was dead too. After the crash, after the firefight in the woods, after dragging that girl through smoke and silence and fear, I thought maybe that was it, that I'd given what I had left, and the rest of me was just running on fumes. But death is different in war. It doesn't come clean, doesn't come quick. Sometimes, it comes quietly, disguised as relief. That was the real danger now, relaxing, letting your guard down for even a second, and thinking maybe, just maybe, the worst had already happened. It hadn't. I was leading 6 civilians, ragged, hungry, wide-eyed, and clinging to me like I knew what I was doing. Truth was, I didn't, but they didn't need a plan. They just needed a direction. Forward, away from the ash, away from the lights in the sky. We moved through the outskirts of the city, a place that used to be neighborhoods, schools, coffee shops. Now, ghost town, rubble, burned out shells of homes, smoke curling from every shattered window. There was something obscene about the silence, like the world had been muted. That's when I heard it, the high-pitched whine, almost electronic, too clean, too sharp to be anything human. Then came the hum, low, cold, like the air itself had turned to ice. I spun around and saw it, hovering 10 meters above the cracked asphalt, sleek, black, shaped like a dagger pointed downward. A VA car scout drone, slick as hell, no visible weapons. But trust me, it didn't need them. I shoved the girl behind an overturned vehicle and raised the stolen plasma rifle. No time to aim, just react. The thing turned. A single glowing blue slit of a face focused on me. No emotion, no curiosity, just calculation. It opened fire, not bullets, something worse. Pulsed energy that shredded air and atomized anything it touched. It melted through brick and steel like it was nothing, sent sparks and concrete flying in all directions. I rolled, pulled the trigger mid-fall, and the plasma bolt slammed into its core. The drone exploded like a sun had sneezed. Bright, hot, fast. I got thrown backward, ears ringing, jacket half singed. But I got up, because that's what you do. You get up. The girl ran to me, yelling something, but I couldn't hear her. Just a high whine in my skull. I nodded, waved everyone forward. We had to move, because if one scout had found us, more were coming. We found shelter in what used to be a metro station. Half of it had caved in. The other half was choked with rubble and rebar, but it was underground and dark. That made it good enough. I set up perimeter alarms using scraps from the drone wreckage and an old motion sensor flare from my gear. As the others rested, I sat alone at the mouth of the tunnel, staring at the ceiling like it might split open again. And that's when I heard the sound. Soft, metallic, footsteps, not human. I ducked into the shadows and peered out. Another drone? No. This one walked. 2 legs. Heavy, measured, tall. It was a VA car ground unit. What the Resistance would later call glasswalkers. 10 feet tall, long arms ending in claws. No mouth, no eyes. Just that single pulsing light where a head might be. It moved through the streets like it owned the world. And maybe, in that moment, it did. I didn't breathe. Not until it passed. That's when I realized we weren't just being hunted. We were being cataloged, measured, studied. They weren't here to fight a war. They were here to observe an extermination. The next morning, I left the civilians in the station with enough supplies to last a day. I told them if I didn't come back, they'd need to move at dawn. The girl, Mira, her name was, she grabbed my sleeve and said, "You're not coming back, are you?" I knelt beside her. I always come back. A lie. But sometimes, lies keep people alive. I moved alone now, through the industrial zone. Rail yards, warehouses, cargo bays once teeming with life and labor. What I found instead were bodies. Dozens, maybe more, stacked, lined up, burned clean, some still smoldering, and etched into the pavement, glowing faintly in that unnatural blue light. Symbols, alien, precise, like math carved in pain. They weren't just killing us. They were recording it. Every death, every burn pattern, every twitch and scream, data. And somewhere above us, someone or something was analyzing the extinction of the human race like a science experiment. That's when I snapped. Not loud like a scream, but quiet, like a wire finally snapping from too much pressure. I tracked the nearest signal, another drone, patrolling alone. I waited, followed, moved like I used to move in the war, silent, low, patient. It entered a data node station, old telecom bunker, long since abandoned. I crept in, rifle raised, one shot to the sensor. It staggered, sparks flew. It turned, disoriented. I lunged with a steel rod I'd found earlier, jammed it through its chassis with every ounce of rage I'd swallowed for the last 72 hours. It twitched, shook, died, and I screamed into the silence, finally letting myself feel it. Not grief, not yet, rage. I dragged the drone's remains back to the metro, dropped them in front of the others. "This is what's hunting us," I said. I opened its data core with a crowbar and started digging through its systems. Low-level stuff, patrol logs, kill records, terrain maps. But buried deep was something else. A ping, encrypted, transmitting impulses, coordinates, not for backup, for something else. That's when I realized these drones weren't just tools. They were scouts for something bigger, something coming. I didn't sleep that night, just sat with Mira curled against my arm, listening to the faint hum of circuitry from the drone's broken body. I kept staring at the stars through the metro's cracked roof. I remember whispering to myself, they think we're dead already. And maybe we were. But dead men can still bleed. And dead men, we can still fight. End of chapter 2. You don't understand what desperation does to people until you see them fight with sticks and rusted rifles against a machine god. But that's the thing about humans. We don't stop because we're beaten. We stop when there's no one left to stand. And even then, something still gets back up. You don't realize how quiet the world used to be until it's not anymore. After the second drone kill, we didn't get silence back. We got noise. Distant booms echoing through the hills. The hum of engines that didn't belong to any plane I knew. The buzz of drones patrolling overhead like vultures made of chrome. And beneath it all, the static. A low, constant hiss in your ears like the world was broadcasting a warning only the dead could hear. We moved at night now. Me, Mira, and the handful of survivors that still looked to me like I was something more than a walking corpse. I'd scavenged a radio from a wrecked Humvee, patched it together with wires and a piece of a frying pan. Somewhere around midnight, I caught it. A ping, faint, repeating, a call sign from a name I hadn't heard in years. Black ash. I stopped walking, just froze there in the middle of a flooded road. Moonlight glinting off the water and smoke curling in the distance. Mira tugged my sleeve. "What is it?" she asked. I looked down at her. Family. Black ash wasn't just a unit. It was a myth inside the Special Forces circuit. Ghost recon, first and last out. The kind of team they only pulled out when diplomacy was dead and God wasn't picking up the phone. I'd bled with those bastards. Watched 3 of them die for me. Thought the rest were long gone. But that signal meant someone was alive. Someone who remembered what we were before the world went quiet. I triangulated the beacon. It led us deep into the old power grid outside the ruined city. Concrete tunnels, buried lines, and old service roads overgrown with vines and bones. We arrived at dusk, the sky bleeding orange and red through the haze, like the sun was trying to burn the world clean. I approached alone, told the others to wait. Didn't want to risk spooking anyone with itchy trigger fingers. Didn't need to. A voice rang out before I'd taken 5 steps. Elias F *****ing Ward. I thought you were barbecue by now. And out from behind a blown transformer stepped Marrow. 6'4", shoulders like a tank, shaved head, eyes always scanning. He looked like he hadn't slept in a month. But that crooked smile, that was real. You brought souvenirs? He asked, nodding to the people behind me. Somebody's got to babysit humanity, I muttered. He led us into the grid's heart, what was left of a blackout bunker, probably built back in the AI panic days. Inside, dim lights flickered over cracked consoles and the last working coffee pot on Earth. A few others were there. Juno, Goss, Ricci, all of them black ash, scarred, tired, alive. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We shared intel, what little we had. The VA car, that's what we were calling them now. No translation, no names, just designation codes. Hive-minded, tech-dominant, devoid of emotion. They didn't invade with armies. They disassembled ecosystems, broke networks, turned population centers into testing grounds. They didn't care what we thought or felt. To them, we were noise. Marrow said they'd taken out global comms in under 3 minutes. Hit every orbital relay like they had the blueprints to our entire network. They're not conquering us, he said. They're erasing us, like we never mattered. And that was the moment I knew. We had to matter. 3 days later, we struck back. It wasn't much. A relay tower hidden inside a high-rise control node on the city's edge. Probably one of dozens sending signals to the VA car mainframe. But it was close and vulnerable. We made a plan. Fast, dirty, human. We'd go in through the underground parking, plant charges on the tower's base and data relays. Get out before it came down. Classic breach and burn. Except we weren't just going to destroy it. We were going to make it hurt. We hit the tower at dawn. The sky was pink with smoke, and the city looked like a graveyard with its ribs exposed. I led the first team, me, Marrow, and Ricci, into the lower levels. Cracked stairs, twisted steel, bloodstains that hadn't dried. The place was crawling with drones. Not scouts this time. Infantry units. Sleek, thin, 6-limbed bastards that moved like spiders and fought like nightmares. We engaged fast. Suppressed rounds first, then flashbangs. I emptied 2 mags before we cleared the stairwell. Ricci took a blade to the shoulder. Non-fatal, but messy. Marrow yanked him back and kept firing like he was born doing it. We reached the core. Massive central relay, humming with alien symbols and shifting light. It looked like a cathedral built out of glass and nerves. Juno's voice crackled over comms. Charges planted. We're 5 minutes to fireworks. And then everything went wrong. The VA car responded faster than we expected. They dropped in reinforcements from a hovercraft, 3 of those glasswalkers, and a dozen drones. I'd seen fear before. In civilians. In rookies. But watching seasoned killers freeze as those things descended, that's when I realized we weren't in a war. We were in a purge. Still, we didn't run. We fought. Because that's what humans do best when there's nothing left to lose. We used walls, debris, the tower's own tech, turned their environment into a weapon. We rigged battery cores to explode, shorted their neural relays. We fought with fire and metal and spite. Marrow took one of the walkers down with a shoulder-fired rocket he'd rigged from a power conduit and a fuel tank. Blew half the parking structure off in the process. Juno lost her leg, but kept crawling to finish the charge timers. Goss got buried under rubble, laughing as he pulled the trigger on his grenade belt. We were bleeding, broken, screaming, but we were winning. I got separated near the data node. Took a hit, burned through my side, knocked me down. I lay there, coughing blood, watching the tower pulse with light. And I smiled, because I knew what was coming. The explosion wasn't elegant. It wasn't clean. It was human. A roaring, uncontrolled inferno of flame and smoke and screaming steel. The tower collapsed in on itself like a dying star, and the shockwave tore through the ruins like God throwing a punch. I don't remember getting up. Don't remember dragging myself out. I just remember standing in the ash as the sun rose behind me, Mira running toward me, shouting my name. And behind me, the wreckage burned with a light they hadn't expected from us. Not logic, not calculation. Fire. They called us primitive, but they forgot one thing. Primitive fire still burns. And that day, in the ruins of our dead city, The VA car learned something new. We don't fight to win. We fight to remember we're still alive. They didn't scream when we blew their tower. Didn't run. Didn't even flinch. Just stood there in the firelight like statues, as if the explosion wasn't a loss, just a data anomaly. Something they'd log, analyze, and delete like an error code. That's when it hit me. They weren't alive the way we were. Not really. They didn't fear death. They didn't feel it. We pulled back into the hills that night. Burned, bruised, bleeding. Half of us limping. All of us silent. The adrenaline was gone. What came after wasn't triumph. It was that deep, gnawing exhaustion you feel after the first round of a fight you know isn't close to over. We lost Ricci on the way. Infection. No supplies left to stop it. Mero didn't say a word. Just closed Ricci's eyes and kept walking. The rest of us reached a safe house, an old underground shelter built during the Martian panic. It still had power. Barely. I collapsed on a cot with Mira beside me. She hadn't spoken since the explosion. Not because she was scared, because she was watching. There's something that happens to a kid who sees the world end. They get quiet. Still, not dead, but no longer growing either. Like something hit pause inside them. I saw that look once before. Years ago, during a Black Ops mission in the Argus Belt. We'd liberated a prisoner colony, the VA car's cousins. The grin had run like a lab. There was a boy there. Same eyes. Empty, but aware. Not afraid. Ready. Later that night, Juno handed me a data spike. Pulled it from the relay before the blast. She said, voice flat. Didn't get much, but I got this. We hooked it into the bunker's backup terminal. Took hours to decode. But when the screen flickered to life, what we saw wasn't a map or orders. It was footage of us. They'd recorded the ambush. Every bullet, every scream, every heat signature, down to the angle of blood spray. But that wasn't the worst part. They'd labeled us, each of us, not names, not ranks, traits, hostility, high, reaction latency, fast, strategic deviation, unpredictable. They were studying us like viruses, like creatures from the wild. And in the corner of the screen, one line pulsed brighter than the rest. Primary classification, specimen not aligned with standard behavioral models. It didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a test result, one they hadn't expected and still didn't understand. The next day, we buried Ricci. No words, no ceremony, just a body in the dirt and a few jagged stones to mark the spot. Then I made a call. Not on the radio. Those were too risky now. The VA car were listening, always listening. I used the old codes, burned into muscle memory from a life I swore I'd buried. Within the hour, a reply came. 3 beeps. Long, short, long. The code for Echo. A cell. A resistance unit in the ruins of an old communications base north of us. And they had something we didn't. A prisoner. We moved that night, traveling through the dark like ghosts. The terrain was worse here. Glass plains where once there were fields, craters where homes had stood, roads split open like someone had clawed at the earth with a giant's hand. When we reached the base, we found Echo battered but alive. For soldiers, no command, barely any gear. But they'd caught something alive. They called it a VA car observer unit. It didn't speak, didn't resist, just sat there, legs folded, smooth metal skin reflecting the emergency lights. No face, no eyes, just a pulsing core at the center of its chest. White-blue, like a star trapped in steel. I approached it slow, careful. It turned to face me, not with malice, just recognition. I didn't expect it to speak. Certainly not in English, but it did, kind of. Its voice wasn't a voice. It was data shaped into sound, flat, hollow, run through some kind of algorithm designed to approximate communication. Your resistance parameters exceed anticipated deviation thresholds. Cold, perfect, like a machine reading a weather report. What do you want from us? I asked. It tilted its head. Clarify what? I leaned in. Why Earth? Why now? It paused, just long enough to feel calculated. Humanity presents cognitive anomalies incompatible with predictive models. Aggression without provocation. Sacrifice without logic. You burn your own shelters to deny enemy use. You preserve weak members despite resource scarcity. You are unstable. The word hung in the air like poison. I smiled. Good. Juno stepped forward. You study us like we're animals, but you don't understand us. The observer didn't blink, didn't shift. It simply said, understanding is unnecessary. Integration is impossible. Neutralization is optimal. And that's when I saw it. Right there. Not fear, not confusion, absence. This thing didn't have fear. It had protocols. It had probabilities. But fear, doubt, hesitation, no room for that in whatever wet dream AI God had built them. That was our edge. They didn't understand what it meant to stand your ground when you've already lost everything. They didn't understand vengeance that had no logic, pain that didn't end in surrender. They didn't understand fire. We didn't execute it. That would have been easy. No, we let it watch. We walked it through the base. Let it see the wounded, the dying, the grieving. Let it hear the songs Mira hummed under her breath to stay sane. Let it feel the rumble when we detonated another VA car node across the hills. Watch the flash. Heard the screams over the comm intercepts. We let it record all of it, because somewhere, deep in its network, someone or something was watching through its eyes. And I wanted them to see, not just our weapons, not just our tactics, but our defiance. When we were done, we left it standing in the ruins, tied to a pole, arms outstretched, a scarecrow for the machine gods. And we carved one word into the wall behind it, in blood and steel. Remember, they don't know fear, but they'll learn, because we're not numbers. We're not equations. We're the variable they can't solve, the question they're too arrogant to ask, and the fire they thought they'd extinguished. That was just the match. There are moments in war when you forget what you're fighting for, not because you choose to, not because you're weak, but because you can't keep up with the weight of it all. The broken bodies, the bleeding cities, the silence that follows every explosion. I didn't think I'd forgotten, but standing in front of that machine, looking down at the data spike we'd pulled from the VA car relay tower, I realized something. I'd lost something. Maybe we all had. Somewhere in the chaos of fire and dust, we had forgotten who we were. Not just the survivors, but what we were capable of. And as the screen flickered to life, showing us the maps, the data, the records of our every move, I realized that maybe it wasn't just the VA car who were hunting us. It was our own nature. It started with a whisper, soft, muffled through the cracked walls of the bunker. Mira came in first, her voice shaky. Elias. She didn't need to finish. I knew what she was about to say. Not now, Mira, I muttered. My head was too deep in the data. My fingers were shaking too much, and I didn't want to stop. The screen showed the last 24 hours, patterns of VA car movements, their deployment tactics, every strike they'd made. We're learning. We can use this, I said, more to myself than to her. She lingered in the doorway. I don't think that's all they're giving us. I snapped my head up. She was holding a small metallic shard, a piece of the observer unit we'd left behind. It wasn't just hardware. It was organic, and it was alive. I didn't understand it at first. How could I? We hadn't seen anything like it before. The VA car were machines. Cold, calculating, always calculating. But this was different. The piece in Myra's hand shimmered under the harsh light. Thin, like a memory, a sliver of something that didn't belong in this world. And as she passed it to me, I felt the heat of it. Not physical heat, but something else. Something ancient. I stared at the shard, and somewhere deep in my gut, I felt it. A ripple of recognition. Like I was looking at a piece of myself. A broken reflection. It was wrong, but it was familiar. I knew something was off, but I couldn't pull it together. I didn't want to. Maybe I wasn't ready, but I didn't have a choice. This wasn't just a piece of technology. It was human. I looked back at the data on the screen. It was too much. The VA car had been tracking us longer than we thought. Every battle, every skirmish, it was all mapped out. The algorithms in the system calculated our next move before we even knew it. They're learning, I said, trying to catch my breath. They're predicting us, Meros said, voice flat, somewhere behind me. I couldn't let that sink in. If they were predicting us, it meant they knew us better than we knew ourselves. It meant we were already beaten. But then something caught my eye. It was buried beneath layers of data, encrypted, but I could read the symbols now. Something human, a pattern of genetic anomalies. I clicked it. The next few seconds were a blur. The screen flashed as encrypted files unraveled before me, like I was pulling apart the very bones of the earth. The words came slow, fragmented, but the meaning hit me all at once. Human DNA analysis, variants detected, trait identification, aggression, unnatural levels, cognitive development, self-destructive behavior within high-stress environments. It wasn't just data anymore. It was us. I felt a cold sweat slip down my neck as I read. There was a name, a code, something we had overlooked before. Project Catalyst. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Mira was standing behind me now, watching the screen with wide eyes. I tapped in the command to pull more. The machine was reluctant, like it was giving me just enough to whet my appetite, but not enough to give me the full picture. And then it unlocked. The screen flashed again, and I saw something worse than anything we'd faced on the battlefield. A list of names, not just ours, but humanity's entire history. Every major conflict, every genocide, every war, every betrayal. And in the corner, there it was. Catalyst gene activated. The words settled into the pit of my stomach like a sickness. I tried to speak, but my mouth went dry. Mira must have seen the change in me, because she stepped forward. "What is it, Elias?" she asked, her voice tight. I couldn't look at her. Not yet. Not until I understood this. The VA car weren't just here to destroy us. They didn't need to conquer us. They knew us. They had been watching us. The genetic anomaly, the one they couldn't quantify or control, it wasn't just random. It wasn't some fluke. It was our aggression, humanity's greatest weapon, but also our greatest curse. I slammed my fist into the console, the screens flashing as the data overloaded. Mira stepped back, afraid. "Elias, talk to me. What is this?" She was pleading now, pulling on my arm like I could still fix this. I had to fix this. I had to stop it. I gripped the console, my fingers trembling. They've been using us, studying us, like lab rats. Every war, every death, it's been calculated. They don't just study aggression, they breed it. I turned to her, the realization crushing me. We've been engineered for this, not by them, by us. They didn't create this, they triggered it. There's a moment, in the heat of battle, when you look around, and you see the faces of the people who fought with you. You see the fear, the anger, the raw, desperate humanity. I saw that in Myra's face now, and I knew what I had to do. Because if the VA car were right, if we were really just the sum of our impulses, then there was no winning, no strategy, no reason to fight. But we couldn't stop. Not yet. Because the one thing we had that they didn't understand was something that couldn't be quantified. Hope. I turned back to the data. There was a hidden file buried deep inside the system. A message. A warning. I clicked it. It was from a human. "We made a mistake. Don't let them turn you into monsters. The catalyst is not a weapon. It's a prison." I knew what had to happen. The data on that shard, the analysis, the patterns, it wasn't just proof of what we were. It was proof of what we could become. I looked at Mira, who was still waiting for me to explain. But I couldn't explain it all. Not yet. Not in words. The only thing left was to show her. And show the VA car what they'd awakened. We weren't their experiment. We were the fire. And they were about to feel it burn. The moment we pulled the trigger, it was too late to take it back. But that's the thing about war. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for you to catch your breath or give you time to question everything you've done. It moves on, relentless, unforgiving, like the tide you can't outrun. We'd woken something, not just the VA car, not just their machines. We'd woken something deeper, something old, and it wasn't going back to sleep. It had been 2 days since we uncovered the truth. 2 days since I realized that the aggression, the fire that had burned through our history, through our blood, wasn't just a flaw. It was a signature, a weapon they could trigger, a time bomb ticking under humanity's skin, waiting to explode when they pushed us just far enough. Mira stayed close after that night. She didn't speak much. I think she was processing it the same way I was, digesting the idea that maybe the war wasn't just against the VA car, or the Grin, or any of the other enemy factions that had plagued Earth for centuries. It was against ourselves. Mero took the data we'd gathered and began working on it like a man possessed. I didn't stop him. He was our tech guy, our problem solver, the one who could turn scrap into a weapon. But even Mero couldn't fix what had broken inside us. The rest of the survivors moved around like ghosts. They still followed orders, still fought when they had to. But I saw it in their eyes. The same thing I'd seen in Myra's, in my own. We were just waiting for the next explosion, waiting for the next strike, waiting for the day we became the monsters they said we were. It wasn't the quiet that got to me. No, the silence was something I could deal with. It was the screaming. It was the things I could hear and see in the cracks. The way people moved, like they knew something the rest of US didn't. Like they felt it in their bones. Something was coming, something worse, and all we could do was wait. It hit at dawn. We were camped in the middle of a desert wasteland, the remains of a forgotten industrial zone just beyond the horizon. The day was dry, the air thick with dust. We'd set up a rudimentary barricade, just enough to make it through one more night. Then the ground trembled. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I'd been feeling the weight of it all for days. Pressure in my chest, the hum of static that had crawled under my skin. But no, this wasn't my mind playing tricks. This was real. The earth shook again, a low rumble that made my teeth rattle. It was like a pulse, deep and steady, like the world itself was breathing. Something's coming, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Marrow, Juno, and Goss looked up from their work, all of them scanning the horizon, trying to find something in the dust. "We need to move," Juno said, her voice tight. Now, I didn't argue. We grabbed what we could, guns, gear, water, and ran for cover. The wind kicked up, whirling debris around us, scratching the air like broken glass. Then we saw it. The first of them came over the ridge, a massive ship, its silhouette cutting through the hazy sky. It wasn't like the VA car scout ships we'd seen before. This was different, bigger, darker, like something born of nightmares, designed to shatter worlds and bend them to its will. It didn't just float. It moved, slow, methodical, like it was testing the air, sizing us up. It came closer with each passing second, a shadow looming on the horizon, casting its dark reflection over everything we knew. The ground shook again, this time harder. I gripped the rifle in my hands, feeling the weight of it. It felt too light for what was coming. "What the hell is that?" Merrill muttered, his voice full of disbelief. "I don't know," I said, my throat dry. "But it's not here for tea." We ran. That's all we could do. We didn't have the firepower to take on something like that. Not yet. Not with what little we had left. The VA car had escalated. They'd unleashed something bigger, something worse. And we were just the unlucky ones who happened to be in the way. The ship wasn't in a hurry. It didn't need to be. It knew we couldn't escape. It knew we were already trapped. We ran through the wasteland. But no matter how fast we moved, no matter how much distance we gained, that thing stayed on us. It didn't chase. It didn't need to. It just followed. And in the distance, I could see the glow of its weapons. I knew the blast radius. We had minutes, maybe seconds. "Scatter!" I shouted. I don't remember the next few moments. I remember running, sprinting through dust and ash, my heart pounding so loud in my chest, I thought it would tear through my ribs. I remember seeing Juno ahead of me, her legs pumping, her face a mask of determination. I remember hearing the roar, and then everything turned white. I woke up to the taste of smoke in my mouth. For a second, I thought I was dead. Thought maybe the fire had already consumed me. But then the pain hit, like 1,000 needles all at once. The sting of burns on my arms, the rawness of my lungs screaming for air. I opened my eyes. Everything was gone. The landscape, the city, even the sky. Just smoke, just fire. The others were scattered around me. Marrow was still on his feet, coughing, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. Goss was kneeling in the wreckage, but I couldn't tell if he was alive or just lost in the daze. Juno was further away, her form silhouetted against the fading embers, clutching her leg. And Mira was beside me, curled into a ball, eyes wide, unblinking. But she was still breathing. Thank God. We staggered to our feet, dusting ourselves off, checking each other for wounds. There was nothing else to do. The world had already rewritten itself. We weren't fighting to survive anymore. We were fighting to remember what it meant to be human. We were fighting to be alive. That's when I saw it. The ship hadn't gone. It was still there, just overhead, darker than before, more massive, almost as if it were waiting, watching. I looked around at the others. Juno was shaking her head. Marrow was muttering something under his breath. And Mira? Mira was still staring at the ship, her face blank. "We're not dead," I said, my voice hoarse. "But we're not winning this either." Marrow's laugh was hollow, cracked. "Then what the hell are we doing, Elias? What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer, not one that would bring comfort. But I knew this. We couldn't outrun them. Not anymore. So maybe it was time to stop running. Time to stand. Not because we were sure we could win, but because we couldn't let this be the end of us. They thought we were weak. They thought we were easy to erase. But they didn't understand us. And if they were waiting for us to surrender, they were going to be waiting for a very long time. The first thing I felt when I woke up was silence. Not the kind that lingers after a storm or a fight. Not the comforting kind where you can finally breathe, knowing the worst is over. No, this silence was different. It was a stillness that made my skin crawl, like the world had stopped spinning just to watch us die. It was thick, heavy, like something was waiting just beyond my reach, pulling at my insides, waiting to see how long I could hold on before I cracked. I wasn't sure how much time had passed since the blast. Hours, days, could have been a week for all I knew. When I tried to move, the pain hit me in waves, sharp, searing, as if my body was remembering every scar, every bruise, every loss. But I forced myself to sit up anyway. The others were still scattered around the ruin of what had once been a city, a desolate wasteland of steel, glass, and ash. The horizon was black, choked with smoke and fire. The air was thick with the scent of something burning, and the heat pressed against my skin, heavy as a blanket. I looked around, trying to find the others. Mero was the first I saw. His back was against the twisted remains of a collapsed building, his head tilted back like he was listening to something far away. His breathing was ragged, shallow. He wasn't in good shape, but he was alive. I forced myself to my feet and staggered over to him, feeling every step like it was the last one I'd ever take. The world swayed beneath me, but somehow I stayed upright. "You good?" I asked, my voice rough, like I hadn't spoken in days. He opened one eye, blinking as if the question caught him off guard. He gave a half smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Define good." I glanced over at the others. Juno was still lying a few meters away, her leg bent at an unnatural angle, but she was moving, her fingers twitching as if testing her own connection to the world. Mira was curled up in the fetal position, eyes closed. But there was a tightness in her face that told me she wasn't asleep. "Not really. We need to move," I said, the words coming out before I could think them through. Mero shifted, his fingers brushing over the ground like he was reaching for something he couldn't find. Where? I didn't have an answer. Hell, I didn't even know where the VA car ship was anymore. The one that had brought us to this point. The thing that had torn our world apart. It was there, somewhere in the distance. I could feel it, but it was hard to say if it was moving or just waiting. Watching. "We need to regroup," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're not alone in this." That's when I saw it. The figure standing in the distance. At first, it looked like a shadow. Tall, humanoid. But the movement was too fluid to be natural. Too perfect. I squinted against the smoke and dust, my heart picking up speed. "Mira," I called out, my voice louder this time, enough to make her stir. She blinked, looking up at me, her face a canvas of confusion and disbelief. "What is it?" I didn't answer. I was too busy watching. The figure was getting closer, walking toward us with long, purposeful strides. It wasn't a soldier, wasn't anything we'd seen before. The silhouette was too clean, too precise. No weapon in hand, just that steady, rhythmic walk as it moved closer. Then, in the middle of the haze, the figure stopped, and the world seemed to stop with it. "Elias," Mira said softly, her voice thin and strained, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure, and that's when I saw the glow. At first, it was barely visible, just a faint shimmer of light. But as the figure came into focus, it became clear. It was an angel, not the kind of angel that comes in a storybook, pure and perfect. No, this one was broken. Its wings, if they could even be called wings, were jagged, burnt, charred like they'd been torn off by something savage, something brutal. The figure itself was draped in dark armor, reflecting the flames of the world around it. But there was something human about it, something I couldn't put my finger on. Even as it took another step forward, it raised a hand, fingers outstretched toward us, and for a moment, I thought it was going to attack, that it was going to do what the VA car had failed to do, finish us off, once and for all. But then it spoke. We were wrong. The voice was nothing like I expected. It wasn't mechanical or cold. It was rich, deep, alive. But it carried an undertone of sorrow that was impossible to ignore. I stepped back, my pulse racing, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. We We didn't mean to do this, the figure continued, its voice almost a whisper. It looked at each of us, its eyes glowing with an intensity one couldn't describe. But the war was never supposed to be this. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. It moved closer, its movements graceful despite the apparent damage to its body. Every step was deliberate, like it was testing the air, testing us. What are you? Juno finally managed, her voice hoarse but steady. She had managed to pull herself upright, leaning against the remains of a wall for support. The figure hesitated, as though considering its answer carefully. Then it spoke again, quieter this time. We are called the Archons, but we are not your enemy. Not anymore. The world around us seemed to blur. For a moment, there was only the hum of that voice, its words sinking deep into my chest like a weight I couldn't escape. Everything felt too close, too much. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to trust it. My gut told me to run, to pick up a weapon and start shooting. But something inside me, something I didn't understand, whispered that it wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just an alien. It was something else, something human. Why? I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. Why did you help us? Why now? The Archon's gaze softened. We were created for one purpose, it said, stepping closer until it was standing right in front of me, to bring judgment. But in doing so, we became what we feared. It paused, as if allowing the weight of those words to settle in the space between us. And then, the Archon knelt. We were meant to lead. We were meant to serve, but we lost our way. And in our failure, we became something that no longer understood you. Your pain, your rage, your fire. We forgot what it meant to be alive. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure anyone else did, but I could feel it. The world wasn't just burning because of the VA car. It wasn't just us fighting for survival. It was bigger than that. The Archon wasn't here to kill us. It was here to redeem us. And maybe, just maybe, it was here to redeem itself. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was an uneasy truce. The Archon stood before us, its damaged wings spread wide, an image of both strength and fragility. There was so much weight in its presence, like it had carried the burden of something ancient, something unforgiven. And yet, for all that heaviness, there was hope. Humanity wasn't alone. Not anymore. In the stillness that followed, I realized something. Hell had rewritten itself, but so had we. We hadn't given up. And maybe now, just maybe, we had a chance to rewrite the ending. There's something about the calm after a storm that feels more dangerous than the chaos itself. After we met the Archon, everything changed, but not in the way I thought it would. The tension didn't go away. If anything, it grew. We'd survived the blast, fought our way through the wreckage, and now we were faced with something even more unnerving. The knowledge that the enemy wasn't a faceless machine. It wasn't just a race of cold, calculating invaders. It was a war between two species that had crossed paths in the most brutal of ways, and the lines between enemy and ally had blurred so much they were almost indistinguishable. But none of that made the truth easier to swallow. They weren't here for us, at least not entirely. They weren't here to destroy Earth. They were here to save it. Or, at least, that was the story they were trying to sell us. The Archon that had approached us was the last of its kind. It had been one of the original Sentinels, created by the VA car for the sole purpose of delivering judgment. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped listening to the algorithms, the orders, the cold logic that had been its reason for existence. Instead, it had begun to feel, and that was when everything had started to break. It didn't want to be a destroyer anymore. It wanted to redeem itself. But how do you undo millennia of programming? How do you fight the essence of your own creation? It didn't have the answers, but it was willing to trust us. And that was something no one had expected. We spent the next few days in a delicate truce, trying to understand the Archon's motivations while the world around us continued to burn. The VA car weren't gone. They never were. They were still out there, still watching, still waiting for their moment to finish what they'd started. And the Archon's revelations were far from the end. In fact, they were just the beginning of something much worse. The VA car were changing too. They'd adapted, and now they had something we didn't. A secret weapon, hidden deep in their forces. Something that was more dangerous than anything we could have prepared for. But we didn't know what it was yet. What we did know, though, was that the VA car were coming, and they were coming in full force. And this time, We weren't just fighting for survival. We were fighting for something far deeper, far older. We were fighting for our humanity. Mira was the first to speak up. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear creeping into her every word. But she was always the one who said what no one else could. "How can we trust them?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. "How can we trust an enemy, no matter how broken they are?" I knew what she was getting at. We'd seen it before. Alliances forged out of desperation, promises made in the heat of battle that meant nothing the second the smoke cleared. The Archons had given us hope, but there was something in the back of my mind that kept telling me we couldn't trust it. Not completely. I turned to face her, trying to meet her eyes, but the weight of the question hung between us. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if we can. But right now, we don't have any choice." Juno was looking at me too, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean by that?" I took a deep breath, watching the smoke curl into the sky. "The VA car aren't going to stop. They're too smart, too relentless. And whatever they've been working on, it's only going to get worse. We need the Archon's help. We need to know what we're up against." Mira didn't respond right away. She just stared at the horizon, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "Fine," she finally said. "But if this goes sideways, we're not just taking the fight to the VA car anymore. We'll be fighting a war on two fronts." We didn't have a lot of time. The Archon was right about one thing. The VA car were coming. Their fleet had already begun to regroup, and we'd intercepted transmissions that confirmed they were massing at a staging point just beyond the outer rim. The Archon, who had introduced itself as Kale, was our best shot at gaining the upper hand. It had knowledge of the VA car, their strategies, their weaknesses, and more than that, it understood what had gone wrong with their plans. But there was a catch. It wasn't enough to know your enemy. You had to understand them, and that was something the Archons had lost over time. They'd been designed to be impartial, cold, and calculating. But now, they were learning from us. And the more they learned, the more they realized how deeply flawed their creators had been. That's what Kale said when we gathered for our strategy session. The VA car were never just invaders, Kale told us, its voice resonating with an otherworldly depth. They were sent to conquer, but they were also designed, just like me, just like my kin. But there is something you must understand. The more we fought, the more we learned. It paused, as if the weight of its own words hung heavy. And the more we learned, the more we saw the cracks, the flaws in their design. They are not what they seem. I turned to the others, my heart pounding. If we were going to take this fight to the VA car, we needed to understand what Kale meant. We needed to know what it had discovered. "How much time do we have?" I asked, trying to keep the urgency from my voice. We couldn't afford another delay. "Not much," Kale said, its eyes flickering in the darkness. "You must strike before they unleash their final weapon. Their forces are adapting to your movements. They've learned to anticipate every step you take. But they have one vulnerability." We all leaned forward. "They're afraid," Kale continued, its voice cold, yet tinged with something. Regret, perhaps? They've learned fear, and that is something they were never meant to feel. But the fear is distorted. It is not the fear of death. It is the fear of losing control. I glanced at Mira and Juno. They both nodded slowly, like the pieces were starting to fall into place. "You mean," Juno began, her voice soft, "they don't fear death. They fear chaos." "Exactly," Kale said. "If you can exploit their need for order, their need for control, you can break them." The next few days were a blur of preparation. We scoured the ruins for any remnants of VA car technology we could use, anything that could give us an edge. Mero and Juno worked tirelessly to decode transmissions, while Mira and I spent our time tracking down any remaining supplies we could find. But the weight of what we were about to do settled heavily on all of us. We weren't just fighting for survival anymore. We were fighting to prove something, to ourselves, to the Archon, to the VA car, that we weren't just a broken species. We weren't just the sum of our violence. We were more than that. We were human, and in that, we still had something to fight for. When the time came, we gathered at the staging point, a ruined city, half buried in the sands of what had once been a thriving metropolis. It was the perfect place for a final stand. The VA car were going to hit us hard, and we had to be ready. We weren't going to fight with technology alone. We weren't going to win with just weapons or tactics. We were going to fight with heart. Kale stood beside us as the enemy fleet descended, its massive ships blotting out the sky. "They don't know what you're capable of," Kale said. "They've underestimated you." And in that moment, I knew he wasn't talking about just the VA car. He was talking about humanity itself. The hours before the storm are always the hardest. It's the waiting, the anticipation, the way time itself seems to stretch and break, like the universe is holding its breath, unsure whether to let you live or let you die. We were all waiting for the same thing, but none of us knew how it would end. The battlefield was set, an open wasteland, barren and stripped of life, a perfect arena for a final confrontation. The VA car were on their way, their massive ships descending from the sky like vengeful gods. They didn't even bother hiding anymore. They had us cornered, and they knew it. The Archons, the last remnants of a broken race, stood at our side, but even they couldn't deny the truth. This was the end of the line. We played our cards. The game was over, and the stakes had never been higher. Mira sat off to the side, her rifle resting in her lap, staring at the horizon. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her hands clenched and unclenched as if trying to wrangle control over the chaos that churned inside her. We all felt it, the fear, the dread. But it was more than that. There was something else, too, a sense of purpose. We had all come to terms with the idea that we might not make it out of this. But what we were fighting for now was bigger than survival. It was about proving that humanity wasn't just a force to be feared. It was a force to be reckoned with. And in the face of annihilation, we were still standing, still breathing. I walked over to her, but she didn't look up. She didn't have to. I could see the thoughts swirling in her head, the doubts trying to make their way to the surface. "Are you ready?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She looked up at me then, eyes wide, bloodshot, but there was something in them, something fierce, something that said she was ready for whatever came next. She didn't have to say a word. Her silence said it all. The others were scattered around, each of us trying to prepare in our own way, knowing full well that the next few hours would either break us or make us. Mero was busy with the last of our tech, his fingers flying over the keys of a console, his mind somewhere far away. Juno sat against a rusted wall, a faraway look in her eyes as she wiped the dirt and grime off her face, trying to make herself ready for whatever fight was coming. Goss was silent as always, watching the sky with that look of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. Kale, the Archon who had once been an enemy, now stood beside us, its damaged wings folded neatly against its back. It wasn't like us. It couldn't be. But over the last few days, I had come to understand that it wasn't the machine I thought it was either. It was something else, something born of pain, of regret, something human in its own way. Its voice broke the silence. "They're close," Kale said, its voice a low hum that vibrated in the air like a warning. I looked at the horizon. The VA car were almost here. Their fleet, massive and relentless, was just a few miles out. It would be minutes, maybe less, before they reached us. And once they did, once they were in range, nothing would stop them from unleashing their final weapon. We didn't have minutes. We had seconds. I looked around at the team, at the survivors. We were all scarred in our own way. Some physically, some mentally, some in ways that were harder to put into words. "We've come a long way," I said, my voice louder than I meant. The others stopped, turned to me. I could see the weight of their eyes, the shared history of what we'd been through, the blood we'd spilled, the battles we'd won, and the ones we'd lost. "You know the plan," I continued. "We hold them off. We hit them where it hurts. We don't stop until every last one of them feels the pain we've felt. No matter what happens, we fight." I didn't know if I believed the words I was saying. I didn't know if any of us did. But I knew this. If we didn't fight, if we didn't stand up and face the storm, then everything we'd gone through would have been for nothing. Mira stood up then, dusting herself off. Her face was set in determination, her jaw tight with the kind of resolve I had seen in every soldier's eyes before the final battle. But there was something different in her now, something that came from the core of who she was. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for hope, for the chance to remind the universe that humanity, despite all its flaws, despite all its mistakes, was still worthy of existence. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Not fear, not doubt, just fire. "We fight," she said, and the rest of the team echoed her. The ground shook beneath our feet, and I looked up. The VA car were here. Their ships filled the sky, dark and imposing, blocking out the sun like the harbingers of doom. But this time, we weren't afraid. This time, we weren't backing down. I could see the first wave descending, a massive fleet of fighters, sleek and deadly, engines roaring as they came in low. The air was thick with the hum of their weapons charging up, the deadly promise of what was coming. But we were ready. The fight was everything we had expected, and less. The VA car came at us in waves, their firepower overwhelming. They rained destruction down on us from above, their weapons lighting up the sky like a deadly storm. But we fought back. We fought with everything we had. I don't know how long the battle lasted, minutes, hours. Time had a way of losing meaning in moments like that. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the roar of gunfire, the cries of those we had lost, and the relentless thrum of the Vicar forces pushing toward us. We gave them everything, every last ounce of strength, every drop of blood. We fought like we had nothing left to lose, because in that moment, we didn't. Kale fought beside us, its power unmatched, its every move precise and deadly. It tore through the VA car ranks like a force of nature, its energy surging in violent bursts. I saw it take down a dozen soldiers in seconds, its glowing eyes flashing as it sent them to the ground, their bodies crumpling under its might. But it wasn't invincible. Even the Archon had its limits. The tide turned when the VA car unleashed their final weapon. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a bomb. It was us. Their weapon was the catalyst, humanity's aggression, amplified, twisted into something monstrous. They had unlocked it fully. And in that moment, I realized the truth. We weren't just fighting for survival. We were fighting for our humanity. And that's when it hit me. The catalyst wasn't just a weapon. It was the very thing that made us who we were. The spark that had driven us to survive, to fight, to defy. It wasn't just a curse. It was our strength. The battle reached its peak. The VA car were overwhelming us, pushing us to the brink, and we were losing ground. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. Something I couldn't explain. I stepped forward, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion. I felt the fire rise in my chest, the surge of energy I'd never known I had. I reached deep inside, tapped into that place where humanity's true strength lay, and I let it burn. It was time to stop running, time to stop hiding from the storm. And when I unleashed it, when I embraced the catalyst and let it guide me, everything changed. We weren't just fighting for humanity anymore. We were fighting as humanity. The silence that follows a storm is never truly peaceful. In the aftermath, when the dust settles and the fires die down, all you hear is the echo of everything you've lost. It's the sound of your own breath, the constant reminder of the cost of survival. Every part of you aches, not from the physical wounds, but from the ones you can't see, the ones you can't touch. Those are the ones that linger. We had won. At least, we had survived. But in the silence that followed, all I could hear was the weight of that word. The battlefield was a wasteland. It had been a dead place before the VA car ever arrived. But now, it was something else entirely. Ash hung in the air, thick and choking, clinging to my skin like the memories of the battles we'd fought, the people we'd lost. The earth itself seemed to mourn, cracked and broken under the weight of what had happened here. We had pushed the VA car back, but there was no celebration, no victory cries, just the quiet aftermath of a war that had torn apart everything we had ever known. I stood at the edge of the battlefield, my hands shaking, not from fear but from the sheer force of what we had unleashed. The catalyst, our greatest strength and our greatest curse, had turned the tide. It had been humanity's fire, the raw aggression and will to survive that had pushed back the VA car forces, that had given us the edge we needed. But it wasn't enough to erase what we had become. The fire was still burning, and I wasn't sure it could ever be extinguished. Mira approached from behind me, her steps light but steady. I didn't need to turn around to know it was her. She had always been the one to follow in silence, the one who understood the weight of every step we took, every moment we survived. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Does it matter?" I said, not looking at her. My voice was rough, raw from shouting, from the smoke, from the weight of everything that had happened. She didn't answer right away. She stood beside me, her gaze on the horizon where the last of the VA car ships were retreating, their engines burning bright in the dimming light. They were leaving, but they weren't gone. I could feel it. The war was far from over. "What now?" she asked, as if she were reading my mind. I glanced at her then. Her face was smeared with dirt and sweat, her eyes tired but unbroken. We had both seen too much, felt too much. But here we were, still standing. "We rebuild," I said, more to myself than her. "Rebuild." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "After all this, after everything we've lost." I didn't have an answer. There was no simple way to explain it. How do you rebuild when the foundation has crumbled? How do you piece together a world that's been shattered by so much violence, so much destruction? But that's what we had to do. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding a way to move forward, together. The days that followed felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Time had lost all meaning, slipping away in a haze of fire and smoke. But eventually, we started to take stock of what was left. The VA car fleet had been pushed back, but they weren't gone. They were waiting, watching, and we knew that they would be back. They had never been defeated. They had just paused. The Archon, Kale, remained with us, though not in the way I expected. It wasn't a leader. It wasn't a commander. It was something else now. It had joined us as equals, not as a ruler, but as a survivor. The battles, the choices, the sacrifice, it had all changed it. We had fought side by side, learned from one another, and for the first time, I felt like there was a chance for something new. But Kale was still the Archon. It still carried the burden of its creation. And when it spoke, it carried the weight of that past with it. "The VA car are not our only enemy," Kale said one evening, its voice a low hum in the still air. "They are a symptom. The true threat is deeper than you know." I turned to it then, feeling the gravity of its words settle on my shoulders. "What do you mean?" "They are not the true architects of your destruction. They only followed orders. The ones who created them, the ones who designed the catalyst, the ones who set this in motion, they are still out there, watching, waiting." I didn't have to ask who it meant. The VA car weren't the architects. They were just pawns. The true creators, the ones who had designed all of this, all the death, all the chaos, they were somewhere. And they were coming. We didn't have much time. We couldn't afford to rest. The VA car would be back, and this time, they would be ready. But the truth was that we didn't know where to go from here. We had fought, we had survived, but we were still blind, still trying to piece together the bigger picture. But that didn't mean we were without hope. It was there, hidden beneath the pain, beneath the loss. The fire was still burning, and I could feel it in every person I met, every soldier who had fought beside me. We weren't just survivors. We were reborn. And that's what scared the ones who had orchestrated this whole mess. Because even in the face of the unknown, we had something. We had each other. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The night we finally sat down together, what was left of us, I realized something. We had made it this far, not because of our weapons, not because of our technology, but because of the one thing the VA car and their creators never counted on. Our will. The will to survive. The will to keep going when everything seemed lost. The will to fight, to rise from the ashes, and to make something of ourselves, even in the darkest of times. We were flawed. We were broken. We had made mistakes, some of which we could never undo. But that was part of being human. The mistakes, the losses, the pain, it was all part of who we were. And in the end, it was that very imperfection that had made us stronger. "We've fought wars," I said to the group, my voice steady now. "We've lost battles. We've lost people. But we've never lost hope." Mira nodded, her eyes soft but unwavering. "And we never will." The stars above us were quiet that night, just like the earth beneath our feet. But in that silence, I found something more important than anything else. It was the knowledge that we could still fight, and we would keep fighting, not for vengeance, not for power, but for something that couldn't be measured in blood or bodies. We fought for the future, for the children who hadn't yet been born, for the dream of something better than this. The VA car were out there, lurking in the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, the ones who had created them were watching too. But we weren't afraid, because this time, we were ready.